Hello there my friends, welcome to my another video. Today we are building this 1 to 72nd scale T-54B from ammo. Now this is a rebox of a TACOM kit, but as far as I know the parts are identical, so it should be a pretty good kit. Mick Jimenez included some references from a real T-54 he visited. I can imagine it could be useful for some people, not quite for me because I'm doing a completely different vehicle. As always, I start by cutting parts out of the sprue using side cutters. For gluing, I use Tamiya Extra Thin Cement Quick Tape. This glue evaporates on air really quickly, creating an immediate and really strong bond. Next step is suspension. The swing arms are thankfully molded to the hull, so no annoyances with lining up. However, the wheels need to be cut out of the sprue and glued together. You can use the sprue gates to glue the wheels together at once, which makes it very easy. However, even without it, this isn't anything as horrid as a Panther or a Tiger suspension. Individual wheels then get sanded down. You get this handy dandy jig to assemble the tracks, however I only use it to correctly place the tracks around the idler and the sprocket. But you could use it for the entire run. Then I simply thread the remaining track parts around the dry-fitted wheels, making sure I don't accidentally glue the wheels to the hull. After that's done, I get simple suspension sub-assemblies that'll be easier to paint. Continuing on, I remove the front mudguards, more or less just because I think it looks cool. I started with side cutters for the thicker plastic, and then the remainder is removed with a hobby knife. Starting the texturing process, I add flame cut texture to the parts that reference show having it. These are mainly places where armor plating meet each other and where it got cut. I wanted to start adding cast texture, so I quickly assembled the basic parts of the turret. This concoction is a mixture of Tamiya grey putty and normal Tamiya cement. I stippled it onto the armor plates to create convincing armor texture. The ratios for the mixture are pretty much so up to your preference, and up to how thick you want the texture to be and how visible you want it to be. I first added it to the upper front plate, and then I added it to the turret, where I made it a bit more serious because it's more visible there. The remaining work was basically bending some PE on a provided jig and gluing it to the model with super glue, and assembling the remaining details like the boxes on the mudguards. These are made from one long strip of piece that you have to bend together. I decided to replace the plastic handles and add some simple handles made out of wire, and after this the model was done. I primed the model using diluted Vallejo Mecha primer. This is the black one. I don't have any mixing or diluting ratios for my primers and paints. Basically, if it's too thick, I simply add more thinner. If it's too thin, I add more paint, or just spray it in more layers. That's how I do this. With this black primer, I make sure I cover all the areas so it'll act as a fake shadow. Then I start base coating the model. Again, I'm not sure about the mixing ratios. This was majority Russian 4BO mixed with some brown and black to create a darker shade. I again spray in thin layers, covering basically the whole model. Then comes my favorite, the post shading method. This method is basically used to highlight your model to make it a bit more three-dimensional and also easier to look at. In 1 to 72nd scale, the models are always optically darker due to being so small. so pose shading method helps negate that and make some nice and bright spots. Basically, what you see me doing here is that I take the base scaled color and lighten it using either buff or white, depending on if I want it saturated or not. Then I take this lighter color and I start highlighting the model. On vertical areas I spray towards the upper parts, and on horizontal I spray towards the middle. I make sure the color is properly diluted and doesn't sputter, and simply proceed to add more and more lightening color in each layer, and going more towards the middle or towards the top of parts as I go with a lighter color. You can push this effect very far and make very harsh contrast that almost negates a need for a wash, since it lines everything so well. To push this contrast even further, I then take the lightest color that I mixed up, and using a brush I pick out all the small details, mainly stuff like rivets, fuel caps, grab handles on the boxes, and perhaps some edges of armor plating, just to make them more visible, because otherwise they would get very lost with a wash in such a tiny scale. This is quite an unnatural technique, but it helps the model look a bit better, in my opinion. Here you can see the finished post shading. I could have definitely pushed the contrast even further, but I'm really happy with the current effect. Anyway, time for small details. The tires on the wheels get picked out with a black color. I use this also for the dashka on the top and the glass on the IR spotlight. I decided to highlight the edges of the wheels with light green, basically I'm dry brushing it so they are more visible. I then got the idea to very lightly dry brush the rest of the tank, which brought out even the smallest detail that I couldn't really paintbrush normally. The unditching log got a base coat of brown. The dust cover got a base coat of leather brown. And some dark rust brown got then used to create a base coat for all the rusty areas, which is the tracks and the towing hook on the side. I then painted the log a little more by painting on some small lines of buff to represent a wood texture on it. Afterwards, I highlighted the dust cover with some lighter browns. The idea is basically the same as normal post shading. I simply paint the highlighted and the more exposed areas with lighter and lighter colors, but this time I do it with a brush a bit more precisely and also a bit more worse because I don't have much practice with this. However, I was pleased with the result. I could have just dry brushed it as well, but it feels a bit better when I make it a bit more precise with a thin brush. For the resty areas, I simply dab them with some diluted light rust color from Vallejo. I think that was the Panzer Aces range. This will just make them look a bit more rusty, a bit more visually textured. That's why I dab it instead of using it as a wash. I did the same on the tracks, slightly dabbing on some diluted light rust color, and then I decided to add some dark rust color over the tracks as well, just so I have two differing shades, and I let them wet blend together, which created a nice rusty effect. I wanted to put some more work into the tracks, as the vehicle is gonna be put in a diorama on a road, so not really muddy or anything, so I put some more detail into the tracks themselves. After the decals and the varnish, I decided to detail the IR spotlight. I wanted to replicate an effect of a glass piece on the vehicle. I honestly don't know what I was doing here. I was just kind of painting lighter grays onto the bottom, trying to create a sort of a three-dimensional effect, and then I used white to make some glint. I think it looks pretty good, but yeah, I had no idea what I was doing. Finally, it was time for some enamel washes. I used Winter Streaking Grime from Ammo, diluted with an odorless enamel thinner. I add the wash around all the details, then once it's a bit dry, I blend it with the same thinner so there are no tide marks. If you dilute the wash enough, you don't really have to bother with cleaning it up too much because it runs around the details really nicely, but it's a bit more hard to see compared to a undiluted, really dark wash. Since I plan on placing this tank in a village diorama as I mentioned, I've decided to make the tracks sort of scratched up as if they were running over concrete. So I dry brushed them with some silver to pick out all of the teeth that would make contact with ground. And I also painted the guide horns and the parts that contact the wheels with silver as well. When that was done, I added only the tiniest bit of chipping, as this is supposed to be a vehicle in a Czechoslovak army, which means they would be taken care of a bit more than in Afghanistan, for example, so I just chipped it a little bit with silver on some parts that would be the thinnest, so the mudguards and the storage boxes. And the last thing I added was some dust. First I tried using some diluted oil brusher. Again, this was diluted with an enamel thinner, but later on I switched to acrylics since I am more comfortable working with those. I blended the oil brusher with the enamel thinner as well. But the acrylic wash, or well, the acrylic paint was diluted and blended with water. I did it around stuff like the hatches, because that's where the vehicle would get dusty, on top of the mudguards, on the bottom of the hull, and underneath the turret. I used this diluted dusty acrylic as a sort of a light wash on the tracks as well. And then when the model dried, it was time for the spinny It really feels like with each model I make, it gets somewhat better. And that's kind of scary because a lot of my previous models have become quite outdated, but it's still a pretty positive thing for me, seeing improvement in my videos and in my models. So I'm looking at it positively, and I'm having a lot of fun working on this model, and I really hope that you are having fun watching these videos. I do hope that you find these techniques helpful and that you find these models good looking. Please let me know in the comments what you think. While you're down there, why don't you subscribe and give me a like? We are getting really close to 1000 subscribers, and I would love to hit that. Because that would show me that people do genuinely care about my videos, and that's the most that I can ask for. So, thank you all for watching this video. Next time I'll be making a little diorama for this model. Goodbye.